Please, let's turn to Psalm number 731. Let's sing. Take time to be holy, speak of the Lord. Read on His word, make friends of God's children, help those who are needy, for in nothing it's blessing to see. Take time to be holy, speak what God Spirit with Jesus alone. Abiding in Jesus, I am not shall be. Thy friends and thy conduct goes by as much to see. Take time to be holy, become thy soul. Each time, each moment, the angels go. Thus thou His Spirit, life comes above. Thou soon shall be visited, service above. I swear it looks like 895. But it may not be, I don't know.
Is it this one?
859. I apologize to you. My contact lenses are all messed up and all kinds of mess. And the only way I can see this is by having it like this. I don't know, y'all may have to help me with this one. Let's see. What a song of delight in this city so bright will be happy in heaven's first known. Our prince will raise songs in His praise when all God's singers go home. When all God's singers get home, where never sorrow will run. There'll be no place like home, when all God's singers get home. As we sing here on earth, songs happiness on earth, faithful portraits from earth to come. Our joy can't compare with the glory up there, when all God's singers get home. When all God's singers get home, where never a sorrow will come and will come. There'll be no place like home, when all God's singers get home. Having overcome sin, hallelujah, amen. We'll be heard in that land overflow. Every heart will be light, and each face will be bright, when all God's singers get home. When all God's singers get home, where never a sorrow or rain will come, there'll be no place like home. just mark song number 936. Song number 936.
Give me 1 second. I know it looks like I'm texting because I am, but I'm sending announcements to Kathy so they can get the bulletin. Boy, you don't look anything like Kathy. But, and I was given a late one that wasn't given to Dawn. Next Wednesday, hot dogs at 305. Services with the young men. They're going to be doing on the Beatitudes, right?
Correct. They're each gonna have one to do.
Each going to have one to do?
It leaves one left open,
Oh, okay.
but I allow them each to pick which one they wanted to do,
Okay, so you're going to do them in order?
possibly.
So, you know, that there's a reason there's an order, right? Okay.
You'll see next week.
We'll see next week. Okay. All right. So I might as well have to talk to you. Okay? Tonight.
Okay.
Wife of Paul. Let me get my notes back so I got them in the right spot. Okay. So we left off last week and in the early years and the start of his second visit to Jerusalem. And I want to make these points to understand something. When he goes to Jerusalem, his first visit was after his conversion, about 3 years after his conversion, he called to be an apostle. But it's interesting because it's in that time frame. Acts chapter 9 has to do with his conversion. Acts chapter 8 has this conversion of the Samaritans and the Ethiopian eunuch. Chapter 9 has Paul's conversion and the early years before he as he goes to Jerusalem. And then you get Acts chapter 10. What happens in Acts chapter 10?
Gentiles come in.
Gentiles, particularly Cornelius, is converted. You have Peter doing some miracles and stuff, but at the end of chapter 9, God placing him down in Joppa with the resurrection of Dorcas. And then you have him being sent for by Cornelius in Acts chapter 10, Cornelius' household. Acts chapter 11, the first half goes to deal with what? There's a hint up there. Huh? Acts chapter 11? You think Acts chapter 7?
Report the Gentile conversion to the truth.
Yeah, that's where they report the Gentile conversion. And it's kind of interesting. It's not like Peter goes in to see him. He's called in. You know? So, kind of that point, some God called on the carpet, so to speak, was the old phrase. He had to give an explanation, which tells us, and I want to get us to understand that, how deeply the problems between Jews and Gentiles were, how deep rooted they were. You know, there was an idea you did not go into a Gentile's home for a Jew. That was just a major no-no. Things that used to happen, you know, in this country for hundreds of years with other races. It was just like, you didn't do that. And this is something that gets rooted, and we see it as a point all the way going through the system. And we understand that Paul makes a statement in Acts 17 that God has made everyone of one blood. So why should we treat them any different?
Is that a question?
Yeah,
We shouldn't.
we shouldn't. There's no reason to. We're all one blood. That's what Paul's trying to get me. And what I want to get across is the things that we see being done in Antioch that we're going to see, are the reason for his second visit to Jerusalem, all comes back to what Paul is getting the Gentiles to do to make the Jews wake up and see that it's one blood. Human nature is always getting in the way of what's right. That's the problem. That's the problem. We let things that were seen raised in past history. You know, this country in the South suffered segregation for a long time. I never knew segregation. But I wrote, huh? It wasn't just in the South. It was focused on the South. And I agree with you, the North. In fact, when the North was condemning the South for segregation, they had their own segregation.
And you know, this is something, of course, because of our culture in Louisiana, in the South. I look at that and I think so much, and you know, we have military people who go to back a long time ago, especially like World War II and other servicemen. They went to the Philippines and they brought home brides. They went to Germany and brought home brides. They went to Japan and brought home brides, because we are one blood. But back to the being in South Louisiana, our black friends, we are of one blood. What is the difference in marrying Japan and marrying a black person? You were headed with this, and I know that.
No,
But
it
that is
wasn't.
something, but that is something that I, in my heart,
Well, I'll tell you this, what we need to do for people that have that question, and possibly realize it may be a personal problem that I have to learn to live with and deal with and get over it, so to speak. Numbers chapter 12.
okay, Numbers chapter 12. I will look that up.
Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. Aaron and Miriam especially has a big problem with Moses' wife. And it literally says because he married an Ethiopian woman. It's not because she wasn't Hebrew. If she'd have been Egyptian, they would have been fine. It's because she was Ethiopian. She was black. And look at God's mercy.
I know it's in the scripture.
Huh? It says the Ethiopian woman, and from what we understand of the Ethiopian people, they were black. That was part of the descendants of Ham.
The scripture doesn't talk about it, but because there had been so much animosity between the Jews and the Gentiles for so long, don't you just speculate that there was probably some very hard feelings on the Gentile side too.
Oh yeah, it's on both, and so
They had to learn to be able to.
just like we get into that, whenever there is a racial division, it's always looked at, well, it's just one-sided, but no, it's oftentimes both-sided. We see it sometimes on both sides if we take time to really look at it. There's something. But what we gotta do is, how do we build that together? How do we, and this is what we're gonna look at, how do we get through that and get other people to be acceptable of it?
God has basically shown us that's the way He wants it.
There we go. God has shown us, but how do we convince other people? So I want us to look at what Paul is doing and understanding the point that he's making, especially to Jerusalem and the Jewish church and those Jewish teachers even that are coming up from there. And it's something that we have to realize today. I mentioned it a few weeks ago. When I grew up, when I was 13 or 14, my brother asked our English teacher to gospel meeting. Turns out she was a member of the Montgomery Church. I grew up in Montgomery, Alabama, was a member of the Church of Christ, had been living there for 6 years, and never came to church. Because it was a white church and she was black. And she ended up coming. She brought her future mother-in-law, her mother-in-law's sister. All them three were baptized. And we had people that complained about it and said, let's go build them their own church. And my father and my stepfather, and I can remember this going on, and it's for my stepmom, 4 years ago, my stepfather, but they're like, no, there's not two heavens, and there's not going to be two churches of Christ in Nashville, Georgia. And so, and it's still integrated today. So it's a point of what do you do and how do you get people to recognize it? So let's go back to Acts chapter 11 and look at in verses 27 to 30. And in these days, prophets came from Jerusalem to Antioch. Then one of them, named Agabus, stood up and showed by the Spirit that there was going to be a great famine throughout all the world, which also happened in the days of Claudius Caesar. So now I've got a lot here that I want to go through on the Caesar point, showing this point of who they were, and there's a point there actually, I don't think I have that much. You have Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, and Claudius. And this gives us our time frame. Claudius is the ruler from 41 to 54. And this famine that happens, this is Barnes' commentary. This is actually where he quotes Josephus. And he tells in the days of Claudius Caesar, the Roman emperor, he began his reign in AD 41 and reigned 13 years. He was at last poised by one of his wives, Agrippina, who wished to raise her son Nero to the throne. During his reign, no less than 4 different famines were mentioned by ancient writers, one of which was particularly severe in Judea, and was the one doubtless to which the sacred writer here refers. So it goes down and lists the other 3, and it gets to the 4th one. One was in Rome, one was in Greece, and the 3rd one was somewhere. We're just going to go with that. I can't remember. But here it is that it mentioned as having occurred, and particularly in Judea. It's described by Joseph in his book of Antiquities, chapter 20. And Josephus does all this weird numbering of his chapters and stuff. So he gives you pretty well where you find it. And he quotes, "A famine," says he, "did oppress them at that time, in the time of Claudius, and many people died for want of what was necessary to procure food with them. Queen Helena sent some of her servants to Alexandria with money to buy a great quantity of corn, and others of them to Cyprus to bring a cargo of dried figs." Now, Queen Helena was the wife of Herod Antipas. Okay? So she's out, while he's doing all his stuff, she's trying to do good for the people of Judea. This famine is described as having continued under two procurators of Judea, Tiberius Alexander and Cassius Fadus. Fadus was sent into the Judea on the death of Agrippa about the 4th year of the reign of Claudius, and the famine therefore continued probably during the 5th, 6th, and 7th years of the reign of Claudius. So it was about a 3-year famine. And the idea that these things came about the way they did, it's severe. Okay? So you got people starving. What do? God's giving you a knowledge that there's going to be a famine, and it's coming shortly, and you got people starving, and you're trying to get those people to accept other people. What do? Prepare for it to happen. Verses 29 and 30. Then the disciples, each according to his ability, determined to send relief to the brethren dwelling in Judea. This they also did, and sent it to the elders by the hands of Barnabas and Saul. Now, what are you going to do? You got people starving, and they bring relief. And it's the nasty, dirty Gentiles. Oh, yeah, they're our brethren, but they're still Gentiles. What are you going to do?
Starving, you're gonna take it.
You starving, you're going to take it. See, you think about it. Sometimes we forget how God does things. Who caused the famine? God. And he gave them special revelation to know that it was coming so they could help them. Why? Bring the two together. Marshall Keeble, I was reading this. At the school, there was a write-up on the Tennessean, which is a big paper in the newspaper, and he focused out in Nashville, and there was A.M. Burton who had started an insurance company, remember the church, big company, and I knew one of the sons when I was growing up, and he was like a grandfather age to me. But in all of Marshall Keeble's works, he helped finance Marshall Keeble to go places. And that was his deal, and that was the thing to Tennessee, and he made a big deal out of it. You could be sitting there in that office, or sitting there in the waiting room to see the president of this company, and here comes this little preacher walk in and tell the secretary is here, and she'd say, "Go on in." Didn't have to have an appointment. Anytime he showed up, he got to go in. And which, when you think about mid-60s in Tennessee, little black man going into that was a big deal to them. What is going on? But Marshall Keeble took this as an idea, a way of helping schools, getting people to get past that. Oklahoma Christian at that time would not accept black brethren as students. So Marshall Keeble went out and with other people raised $50,000 to help that school that was struggling to make it. Went out there and gave it to them, presented it to them. Guess what happened next year? They accepted their first 3 black students. How can we refuse people that help us? How can we refuse to be around people that help us? Especially brethren. That's what God's got at the point. We don't have to jump up and down and hold rallies and, cause problems. We be the solution to the problem. God will bring in a way for a problem to need solving. We just need to be part of the solution. And that's what they did. And we get down to Acts 12:25, we find Barnabas and Saul returned from Jerusalem. When they fulfilled their ministry, they also took with them John, whose surname was Mark. Now, we read this instance here, and we say, okay, they did a one-time thing. Was that the only time that Paul raised money from Gentile churches to help the Jerusalem church?
I don't think so. I mean, he wrote them, he had told them in his writings to collect money and, and so that was different events, I would think.
It is. So when he writes 1 Corinthians, it's long after this. And he starts in 1 Corinthians and then he writes 2 Corinthians, remind them, here's what I told you to do a year ago. Now we're coming to get this money, it needs to be ready. And it was to bring relief to the Jerusalem church. In fact, he's arrested. The reason he's there when he's arrested is taking that money to the Jerusalem church for them to distribute to those who had need. And what was still going on in Jerusalem?
Still hating the Gentiles
Even where?
in the church.
Even in the church. It was okay for the Gentiles to have their own congregations, but don't come to Jerusalem to worship. That was almost the way they acted. We'll tolerate you just because you're bringing help, but Paul, you need to go over here and let everybody know that you're still a Jew. What was Paul?
Christian,
Who said that?
neither a Jew nor a Gentile.
Neither a Jew nor a Gentile, a Christian. A Christian. Paul's learning things as he goes on. So now we get into his first preaching tour. His residence in Antioch, this is about 45 to 47. When we get to this point in thinking, in Acts chapter 12, we get some things, and we're going to go in this a little bit. What happened in Acts chapter 12? Anybody remember? Has to do with Herod.
Herod gets his due.
Herod gets his due.
I'm trying to remember the rhyme.
Yeah, you're on deal. Okay. Herod gets his due, which is part of Acts chapter 12. What causes Herod to get his due?
Well, he killed James. Everybody liked it so much that he arrested Peter. And then he was up, then the Sidonians he was had a problem with the Sidonians, so they threw a big feast or festival for him. And he went down there to see them and spouted off some stuff and didn't give God the glory and killed him.
The interesting part is comparing the things with, and this is Herod Antipas. Okay? And the interesting part is that Josephus records the same event. And Josephus puts in there how that, now Luke puts in there like his apparel made him look like rain. Well, one thing they would do, which I think happens a lot in one time now, in the crowd, they had placed cheerers, okay? People that say, yeah, 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 you know, and talking and screaming about him, and they got the crowd into it, and the crowd was scared of him because what he was wearing was a suit of armor that was made of all silver. So in the early morning light, it's glowing. And they are in fear of him because they're hearing his voice and they're seeing him as a deity. And he continues, and Josephus reports that he kept having pains in his belly. The scriptures say, Luke says, that an angel from God, sent from God, because he did not give God his glory, but rather took it for himself. When the people say that he appears to be a god, filled his belly with worms. And eventually he shut up because the pain was so great. And they carried him to his bed. Josephus records that he died 5 days later. So we kind of look at that point, we look at it and think, okay, well, he got sick of the worms and he eventually died from 5 days. He suffered for 5 days and died. And the reason I bring that up is because of these verses here. After Paul and Barnabas get back with Mark to Antioch, we open up chapter 13, we read, now in the church that was at Antioch, there were certain prophets and teachers, Barnabas, Simeon, who was called Niger, Lucius of Cyrene, Manaen, who had been brought up with Herod the Tetrarch, and Saul. Now this Herod the Tetrarch is talking about Herod Antipas. Okay? As they ministered to the Lord and fasted, the Holy Spirit said, now separate to me Barnabas and Saul for the work to which I have called them. Then, having fasted and prayed and laid hands on them, they sent them away. So some things we want to look at. This Manaen. Okay? Now, I made one mistake. The Herod that is in Acts chapter 12 is Herod Agrippa. Okay? No. Scratch that. I'm wrong. It is Herod Antipas. Herod was Tetrarch of Galilee, the word here translated, which had been brought up. Sununos denotes one who is educated and nourished at the same time with another. It is not elsewhere used in the New Testament. He might have been connected with the royal family, being nearly for the same age, was educated by the father of Herod Antipas with him. He was therefore a man of rank and education, and his conversion shows that the gospel is not confined entirely in its influence to the poor. Why is it important to understand that here's a man raised with this Herod that we just see die? Huh? Eyewitness? No. Well, because the point is, who is this Manaen? And he was raised with Herod Antipas.
Part of scripture that he was, or part of the commentary, he was a wealthy man.
Okay.
He was not in a position of being poor,
Right.
which the gospel was appealing to the poor.
Right.
He was a peer
He was a peer of whose?
of the ruling class.
Of the ruling class. So what does that tell you? What we want to understand is, here is one who, they're on opposite, they're raised together, virtually, educated together, but you have one who is so arrogant among himself that he'll let himself be called a god, and another who is so humble he's willing to be a Christian. See, God's trying to tell us that not all people of influence are bad. Just because you have one that acts this way doesn't mean they all have to act that way. They can even be raised together and talk together, and one willing to serve God, one not. Here's the interesting part. They're all Jews. The Herods were Jews.
Idumeans.
Huh?
They were Idumeans. They were.
Idumean Jews.
They were actually Edomites.
But they were Jewish descent. Even when we read of Agrippa, Herod Agrippa, his wife, they were Jewish descent. That's why Paul asked Agrippa, do you believe the prophets? I know you believe the prophets. You're a Jew. They're all of Jewish descent.
This is off the topic, but it goes back to what Martha was talking about with the race issue. But I have heard from lots of young people comments that if they're rich, they bound to have gotten it the wrong way. They've got to be crooked. And you have people who are stereotyping poor people, oh, well, they must be low count and lazy. Wealthy people, they must be crooks. And it's a war going on to separate people who have the same goal in mind to go to heaven.
And that's a point that I'm getting to. It's not, well, you got it. It's not just about color or culture. It's about class.
Especially not.
All these things work on class, on color, on culture. All these things are put there that the devil uses them to divide people. And you made that perfect point. Here you have Herod, the Herods versus Manaen. Manaen working with those at the church in Antioch. Some translations call him a minister, others are teachers, prophets, and he's listed right there with prophets and teachers. I kind of agree with Barnes. Teachers is probably referring to preachers. So you have this going on, and here they are, and God's trying to tell us something.
He's trying to get us to think with spiritual eyes and not physical.
There you go. Forget the physical. Literally, there is no different internally between you and me other than our body shape. We may have some different some parts missing. We may have some parts replaced. We may have some fixed stuff. But internally, we all have a heart in about the same place, our liver about the same place, our gallbladder if we still have it, our kidneys. The only difference is this right here. The blood's all the same. And it all came to the same place, from the same place.
2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 16 says, from now on, therefore, we regard no one according to the flesh. Even though we once regarded Christ according to the flesh, we regard him thus no longer.
Why?
Because he's spirit.
Because he's spirit. So what am I supposed to be doing?
I'm supposed to see their spirit, not their flesh.
And see their spiritual need. While at the same time help them with their physical needs at times, but focused on that spiritual need. There's no reason for it anymore. And
Brad's focused on the spiritual.
if we're focused on the spiritual,
We're gonna live with
we're not going to deal with it. We're going to overlook that physical, and we're going to, instead of seeing somebody else in need, we're going to see a brother in need. Marshall Keeble says, he used to say, I may not be their brother in Christ, but I'm still their brother in Adam. I'm gonna focus a little bit on him. That's the point that with Teresa making up this man here, working with the church at Antioch, wealthy influence. You go back and you look up Abraham Burton, here's a wealthy man working with a descendant of a slave. Both Marshall People's father and great and grandfather had been slaves. But you know what else they were? Members of the church.
Royal priesthood.
The
Does
the
any,
plantation owner had taught them how to read, had all his slaves that could read, one of the few that could, and had taught them the Bible, and built them a church.
That's the whole point of Philemon.
That's the whole point of Philemon. He had built them a church and taught them, and those two were preachers who taught Marshall people how to preach. Now, go ahead, Ron.
Well, that was the point of Philemon, is taking a wealthy man that had a slave that ran away from him and said, now treat him as a brother.
Not just as a slave.
But treat him as a brother.
does anyone else, I'm sure you do, when you're traveling and you pass a Church of Christ building, just have a warm feeling?
I do.
I do too.
I love to
do.
see it. I love to see them
And
in movies and country songs.
yes, yes.
Two come to mind. Back in the 80s, there was a song guy and he's talking about him and his wife had split up. He was an alcoholic, but he was trying to get out of it. He moved to Little Rock, Arkansas, and he says, I like the preacher at the Church of Christ. No, this was Colorado. Montgomery Jr. Gentry did Our Town. And twice they mentioned the Church of Christ in that song.
And also, when you have the occasion to meet someone out in the world, traveling or whatever, who is a member of the Church of Christ, there is that warm feeling that this is my brother or this is my
You think
sister.
about
I
it,
love it.
They're no longer a stranger, they're a brother or a
That's it.
sister.
Absolutely.
You have identification together.
Oh, and by the way, I realize, in trying to put the DeQuincy Church of Christ name out there, I volunteered for the ladies to make me some desserts for teacher appreciation at Sanger High School, not this coming week, but the following week. And it's gonna have a little sign that says furnished by the DeQuincy Church of Christ. So there.
Actually, I think it's right on track.
I'm just saying.
You know, it's things like, this is exactly the thing that we're talking about, this kind of thing.
It was.
I said, this is the kind of thing that we're talking, do it.
Well, then-
Sometimes we look at it like it has to be a big thing, but what about a little thing like that?
Her sister's in need.
Our sisters in need.
I'm the sister in need.
Yeah, she went out there and put her head out there and opened her mouth, and now she's got it delivered.
That's exactly,
But,
and
you know
Don
what?
sitting there shaking his head. Oh, I was doing it.
Who was? Who was shaking her head?
Don,
Don.
I was on the.
He's like, don't blame the elders for this one. But you know what? Here's the truth. Martha, you never did it if you didn't know that, if you didn't think they could deliver.
I'm sorry, what?
I said you never did it if you didn't think they could deliver.
Well, absolutely. There's no doubt about it, and I really did do it because there are people that don't know
Who we are.
who we are. And it's just a little thing, but every teacher, faculty, staff will go through there and they will get a dessert and they will see that it is furnished by us. And that's important to me.
But the biggest and the most important part of it is that you are so well liked and respected that people know you, and then they know this is where she goes to church. So that.
It makes a point, and it helps gets it out there, and even though, you know, we say Martha said it, well, they know, hey, Martha said it, but she said it, and the sisters delivered. And when is that?
Not this coming week, but the following.
What's the date?
Could be the-
I'll tell you in a second.
Is it the
The
8th?
following week, the following Sunday, 7th.
I'm sorry,
The following Sunday is the 7th. All right,
it's the week after that.
the week after the 8th. Sunday.
Need any taste testers?
May 12th,
You'll stay.
May 12th, so
May 12th, a Thursday, May 12th.
So it's 2 weeks from tomorrow.
Right, 2 weeks from tomorrow.
2 weeks from tomorrow.
And how many teachers?
Oh, we're like 67.
60 to 70 teachers, so that's a big bowl of banana pudding you need to teach Joey how to make. Okay, but this is, sometimes, let's, think about this for a second. In Mark 16:15, Jesus says, go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature, right? He said, go. You know what he didn't say? How to go. Things like that gives opportunities. That's part of the how. You know, Joey and I in the office were talking because somebody said something about where they heard our Sunday service. And I'm trying to do this without, and I kind of made a comment, I never thought I'd be an international preacher. But that's what the internet actually allows us to do sometimes. It's actually a way for us to go and not just be focused right here, but go.
And it also puts it out there where it is forever out
Yeah, you know, yeah, it's available, you know, throughout, you know, that's the thing. So, kind of like the scriptures. So now, kind of went back a little bit because we had the two Herods here. Luke 3, 1 and 2, now in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, Pontius Pilate being governor of Judea, Herod being tetrarch of Galilee, his brother Philip, tetrarch of Iturea, and the region of Trachonitis, and Lampsacus, tetrarch of Abilene. This is while Annas and Cyrus were high priests, the word of God came to John, the son of Zacharias, in the wilderness. This Herod here is Herod Agrippa. And that is important because, and his brother Philip, what did Herod Agrippa do? Speaking of John the Baptist,
there.
he had him beheaded. Why?
Wow.
His wife is shacked up, whatever she was. Well, that we don't know, but we know she was Philip's wife, because that's what it said, because he had Philip's wife. Herodias was Philip's wife. So whatever was going on, he's the one, he's the same one that would call, or that Pontius Pilate would send Jesus to, who he hoped he would see a miracle. He was more tolerable than Philip. How do we know that? We have some outside history, but what does the Bible tell us? Okay, Ron, you did Out of Egypt on Sunday. When they left Egypt, and Matthew says that, where do they go?
When they left Egypt, they went back to master.
But where did they start to go? Matthew puts in a footnote. They started to go to Jerusalem, but when Joseph heard that Philip reigned in Herod's place, he turned and went to Galilee. Because Herod Agrippa was more tolerable to the Galileans than John was to the Judeans. Eventually, Philip would be put in fact, all of these would eventually go into exile by Caligula. Oh, actually, some of them Augustus.
We also had two high priests against the law too.
Yeah, because and how did that, let's just stop there since you brought it up. In fact, we're going to stop there, period. And I just looked at the clock. And we'll pick up the rest next week. But how is it they had two high priests?
One was the appropriate one that was supposed to be the high priest by lineage. The other was appointed because by the leaders of the country.
By Rome, or the governor at the time, or our previous governor, and whatever.
Placed him in there so they had control over the Jewish people.
There you go. And it's interesting because Caiaphas was the high priest by birth, and Annas was his son-in-law, appointed by Rome. And it would be Annas that in John chapter 12 that would make the statement that it's better for one man to die for the people than for them to lose their place in the world. And when they first arrest Jesus, they take him to Caiaphas, then they take him to Annas. And it's Annas that takes him to Pilate. Think there was some Roman influence there? Or they were using their influence with Rome? Rome had used their influence? What do we call that? Thinking about Ukraine and Russia. Quid pro quo. Quid pro quo. You scratch my back, I scratch yours. I think that might have been why Pilate finally just said, you know what, y'all do what you want. We've got some influence in Rome too, Pilate. So, and Don's completely right. According to the Hebrew law, the Old Testament, there was no reason for there to ever be two high priests. In fact, Annas could not even be a high priest.
There were two high priests during David's time.
I would have to look that up, but if I'm not mistaken, there were two high priests, but there were two not high priests at the same time in David's time. Does that make sense? Now, that speaks of two priests when he leaves Jerusalem, but it doesn't say that they both are high priests. If you go back and you think about Aaron was high priest, but who were the other priests that served right under him? There were four of them. Just say what they were. His sons. Two of them died, and they had them abided. Now, the one I remember was mainly is Phineas, because Phineas is Aaron. What's your song?
9:36.
What's the title?
Lord, I'm coming home.
Lord, I'm coming home.
Yeah.
Well, one day I hope that's what we're doing. We're all going home. I read something today. I think Don had it on there on Facebook. Facebook, a little meme. That it's not about, we're all gonna live forever, we're not gonna die. The main thing to worry about is location, location, location. And I started commenting, death is nothing but a change of address. Make it a good one. Let's stand and sing.
I wander far away from God. Lord, I'm coming home. The path of sin to all I'm coming home. Coming home, coming home. To all. Open my arms of love, Lord, I'm coming home. I'm thirsty and precious you. I'm coming home. I'm bound with bitter tears. Lord, I'm coming home. Coming home, coming home. Never more to roam. Open wide thy arms of love. Lord, I'm coming home. My soul is sick, my heart is sore. Now I'm coming home. My strength renewed, my hope restored. Lord, I'm coming home. Coming home, coming home. Never more to roam. Open wide my arms of love. Lord, I'm coming home. I apologize. Dwayne, would you close that prayer?